Hi, my name is Martin Purnell, and welcome to part 2 of our St Patrick's Day special podcast with Martina, Purdy and Elaine Kelly. In part 1, we visited the area associated with St Patrick's early ministry. In part 2, we visit Slieve Patrick, Struell, Down Cathedral, and finally his grave. However, do not switch off once you've heard our goodbyes, as there is St Patrick's Breastplate. But what is St Patrick's Breastplate? What is Slieve Patrick? What can we see at Struell and Down Cathedral in Downpatrick, Northern Ireland? All these questions and more will be answered in the next hour. If you'd like to contact us, by the way, our email address is ogc@accessradio.biz, and biz is spelled B-I-Z. And our Facebook page is Off Grid Christianity. I truly hope you will enjoy this special podcast as much as we enjoyed making it. Wow. And I say wow, I've been forced to run up. How above the ground are we now then, Elaine?
Well, I'd say the statue itself is some 32 feet itself. So I'd say you put that on top of a 10-acre hill, Struck Mountain. So we must be about, I don't know, about a couple of hundred.
20,000 feet at least.
A couple of hundred feet.
Yeah, more than that. And you made me run up here just as well I'm super fit. That's all I'm saying.
You really had to wait half an hour for you to catch your breath. Just a joke.
Yes. Not far off it though. So here we are then at the top of, what's the name of this hill?
This is Slieve Patrick. As Martina had said earlier, this plot of land, this little mountain, Slieve stands for mountain in Irish, was given by the people of this area, the Hampton family, Denny Hampton, was given to the local parish priest. You can see across there, obviously, the church, Saul Church, which was built in 1933. Now that was the memorial, as it were, to Patrick's 15 centuries of being here, 1500 years. So the local population here, the Catholic population, their response was to do this. So this actual piece of land that was given, called Slieve William, was consecrated in 17th of March 1932 by the then bishop, who cut the sod. And there's a man down the hill who actually still has the spade. They've cut the first sod. Now, they cut the sod and blessed the mountain and had mass. Now, the thing about it is, they then raised money to go away and build this absolutely brilliant statue. Now, this statue was built by the quarrymen between Kilcoo and Newcastle called Ballymcgrigan, and it took them 6 years. Now, if you look at this, it's all done in block. But as you look towards the statue of Patrick, you can see the way it's carved. Yes. Now, back in those days, between 1932 to 1938, them men would not have had the very top mechanical machinery. A lot of that was done by hand. And you can see the love with which that was done. You can see the folds of the chastable and of the various parts of Patrick's gown. And you can see how that was done. Yeah. Now, this was actually put up here on the third Sunday in June, 1938, some 6 years later. And it's here that they had the High Mass. And some 50,000 people came here, at least, from all over Ireland. Martina?
Yeah, just to say a little bit about the statue, it looks a bit like it's sliced like a wedding cake if you look really closely. That's how it was all put together. Yeah. Now, it says at the base, Slieve Patrick, which is Irish for St. Patrick, Slieve being the name in Irish for saint, 432 to 1932. Below it is Latin, and above it is Patrick himself, who faces actually towards Downpatrick, the town that the Anglo-Norman knight, John de Courcy, renamed Downpatrick, Patrick's stronghold, and he championed Patrick. Now, if you look up to the statue, you'll see that the feet look a little odd. So on the right hand, Patrick's right, he's wearing a boot.
He is, yeah.
Yeah, and on the left hand, that's not a mistake, he's wearing the sandal of the apostle. The boot is in homage to the quarrymen, and obviously the sandal for the Christian. And if you go up, you'll see his hand is in the three, pointing to the Trinity. He has the staff of the bishop and the mitre on his head, which probably he may never have worn, but it's a modern attribute. Now, his face is particularly striking. But what's striking for those who know is that Charles Darcy, then the Church of Ireland Archbishop of Armagh, was the model for the face. I always joke that he's probably better looking than the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Armagh, but he's dressed in the robes of the Roman Catholic Archbishop. So it's a bit of a nod to ecumenism.
Yeah, and as Martina's pointed that out, I mean, you think about it, one faces the other. Saul Church, the cradle of Christianity, and which obviously is in the hands of the custodians, the Anglican Communion. And here we have the absolutely amazing statue of Patrick, which was in 1964, National Geographic did a whole study on it and a whole expose on it, just so magnificent it is. And one faces the other. And the ecumenism is there to see. You can see in the statue of Patrick how much there was a collaboration of the Christian faiths, how that has stood the test of time. You can see also as well what we talked about being the Celtic cross.
Yes.
And you can see that that is at the centre just beneath Patrick's feet. Round each of the sides there are 4 bronze inscriptions, plaques that have been put up. Now this particular one here more or less indicates that there's a story behind it. It's written in Latin.
I'll let you translate it.
Okay.
I don't want to show off.
I'll tell you the story. Maybe that'll be the translation. It's in the time of, it goes back to 441. If you remember, Patrick came here in 432. And at that time, Leo was the Pope at the time. But basically, there's a story which is true. And if you go to St. Patrick's Centre on the exhibition, they have it well documented. When Patrick came here, he was it was a lot of hard work, but he was having great success. At that time, the senior ecclesiastical court was in Britain. And there was a lot of jealousy about, because Patrick was doing so well, and also because he was the apostle, the bishop here, he got on with his work. And he had what was called, the shekel, the people's shekel, the money. Patrick, whatever he got, he used and put into the church here to build it up. But there was some jealousy about Patrick, and those in the British ecclesiastical court wanted him to basically send over money to them. But he was using it and obviously working hard here to build up the Irish church. Cut a long story short, a friend of his who he knew from the time before he was trafficked told a story about him and basically, got him into difficulty with the British Ecclesiastical Court. Now, this is when he was a youngster. But the friend, in reparation for it, when he could see his wrongdoing, actually travelled to Rome and came back with a letter from Leo, Pope Leo, and presented it to the court and a copy to Patrick. Patrick was to be left alone to be able to build up the church here in Ireland. And he was to use whatever funds he had that was necessary, he was to use them to build up the Irish church. But that shows you, the jealousy against Patrick at that time, even going back into his day, just a few years into his mission.
As if there would be jealousy in modern day Christianity for someone that starts up a church and everything else. As if.
Well, the sad thing is that human nature doesn't change, but Christ brings the transformation, and it was jealousy. I always argue that it killed Christ as well, because the resentment and jealousy of that he had the people with him, and he was challenging the authorities. By the time Patrick had left this particular area, there were, I think, at least 50 churches, and this whole area towards the Irish Sea to the left, because the view here is just amazing, that's known as Bishop's Court, and they just built churches almost on every, well, not the street corner, but across fields. And so this is a very rich in Christianity and Christian heritage. And to the right is the amazing view of Strangford Lough, where Patrick would have sailed in.
And we're going to talk about that view any second now. I said we're going to talk about the view, but I just want to show off here to show that I have been listening. And for those that come on the future pilgrim walks with yourself, they'll go, oh yes, Martin was right. Because in the previous church we were in, the stained glass window of St. Patrick, he was holding his crook in his right hand, whereas up here he's holding it in his left hand. That means he's very ecumenical, just saying.
Yeah, it also means that according to that, he also has it turned into himself, and that also means that this is his domain in the sense of this is his ecclesiastical area. He is the Archbishop of this area and Bishop, so that turned into himself points that out.
There's a lot of secrets to this statue.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be sort of half clever, and we find that out. It's amazing. If you don't ask, you don't get. So this view then, what a view. Who's going to describe it? Who's going to go first?
Well, I do part of it, Martina, then you can kick in. Okay, so
Go on then,
I'll do this bit and then you do the bit around here. So if I take it from here, and we'll end up back around here at Donard, is that okay? Okay, so if we look here, just beneath us here, when you look over, you find the River Slaney, just the estuary of it there, and that's where Patrick would have arrived. Just across here. So if you think about it, he made his way over the field. It's a very short distance, but that's where he would have encountered the swineherd, who would have brought Deku to him, and then he brought him over there and gave him the barn.
And it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you're coming up the loch...
Yeah, that's where he would have ended up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You go as far as you can go, so he would have gone there.
The loch is right in front of us, and if you look straight ahead, you can see Scrabo Tower, which is Newton Ards.
Yes, it is.
Straight ahead.
Yeah.
You come across here, you can see Cave Hill, you can see Divis, and beyond that there would be Slemish, which is the actual mountain that Patrick would have tended the sheep on. And what you have across from us now, just straight ahead of us, is a very tranquil Strangford Lough, which Patrick would have come up. And over
several islands on, just saying.
Yeah, there's something like, someone said there's something like 365 islands on the loch, which is one for every day of the year. And beyond that, way over there, now in the distance, in the far distance, you have Scotland.
Yeah.
You can see it over there.
Yeah.
And over here, coming over to the right, if you move further around, you have the Isle of Man, which is just there.
Belfast is clearly evident over there by Cave Hill in the distance, which is also called Napoleon's Nose, isn't it? If I'm right.
Yeah, my mother used to call it that. Yeah, just by the shape of the rock.
Yeah.
And no, we are very blessed to be up here on such a clear day.
That's amazing.
It's also my favorite time of the year to come here because you have all the gorse that surrounds the monument, so you get the real contrast with the green, and you just see so many sleepy little drumlins. It's very characteristic of Down, the formation of the land, and you see this particular point, you get north, south, east, and west in every direction. Patrick himself faces Downpatrick, as I said before, and he faces Slieve Donard, the highest peak in Northern Ireland, and also named after his disciple Donard, who was the son of a chieftain that Patrick converted. And as we go around the front,
also though, we're on top of this hill, but if we go back 1600 years, Patrick at the base there for the church he just founded, he'd be seeing this hill every day, and we're on top of it.
I think so, because it would have been the highest point in this particular area other than Cathedral Hill, where Down Cathedral is, and that was the highest point in the town. But, you know, this was an area that was tidal. So Downpatrick was always flooding because the tide would come in, so people would have travelled by boat generally. And there was a number of barrages built, the last one I think in the 1950s, to stop the tide coming up to where actually the St. Patrick Centre is built today, just in the foot of the cathedral.
And that's the Isle of Man I can see over there, is it? Wow.
So people are really amazed, and it's not a very difficult climb. As you climb, you'll see...
I don't know. I think actually anywhere else, especially United States of America, they would have had a cable car put in here.
Well, you haven't been the first to suggest it. Yeah, the Americans always talk about the gift shop when they come. But, you know, as you climb, you'll see there's 14 crosses on the way up. So that's the Stations of the Cross, and so it's a way of remembering the Christ Passion. People come here particularly on Good Friday. The crosses were donated by different families from different Christian denominations.
Can I just say, it's actually quite poignant for me because when I went to start my broadcasting career properly, there was always talk of us being able to broadcast from the Isle of Man. And, you know, so I can see it clearly here now. Wow, amazing. Yeah.
I have read some accounts that the Isle of Man's patron saint actually was a disciple of Patrick, and it might have been a bit of land that, you know, wasn't too difficult to cross. Yeah. There's always these legends around Patrick that he was going to make his way to the Isle of Man to convert the people, but he was passed by a red-headed woman who didn't bless herself, so he decided not to. But there's one of the kind of stories that spring up about Patrick.
Talking of which, I know we talked about St. Paul earlier on, and I always was told that St. Paul was in fact married because if he said he claimed to be a Pharisee, I think this was the argument, if he was claimed to be a Pharisee, then you had to be married. I could be wrong on that. But what do we know about St. Patrick marrying or anything else like that?
In those days, priests could marry, but there's no record of him marrying. His father was a deacon in the church, and his grandfather he describes as a priest. But as for Paul, he took a vow, a Nazarene vow, shaved his head. So I don't know if that he had some exemption.
Could have been afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many mysteries about the history, and some of it comes down through tradition.
Yes.
Obviously, the written word didn't come until at least 70, 80 years after Christ. So just looking towards Downpatrick, and you'll see from the Strangford Loch, you see this river coming along, and that's the Coyle River. And the Coyle River runs through Downpatrick. And on the other side of the Coyle is a place called Inch Abbey. And Inch Abbey was built by John de Courcy, the Anglo-Norman knight, who also built Carrickfergus Castle, and he built it well. And he built Inch Abbey reasonably well. It's one of the best preserved ruins of Gothic architecture on the island. And when John de Courcy built the abbey around 1170, it was in reparation for destroying a monastery, this whole area steeped in monasticism, and in reparation he built Inch Abbey. And John de Courcy made himself the Prince of Ulster, and he was an incredibly ambitious knight. But the story of Patrick was championed by him, and he appointed a monk called Jocelyn at Inch Abbey on the other side of that river to write the story of Patrick, and it was Jocelyn who recorded that Patrick banished the snakes from Ireland, and as Elaine said, the snake represented the pagan practices.
And there's something I could just point out to you right in front of us. You can see obviously these lights that are all the whole way around. There's one at each corner. Now, whenever it comes to St. Patrick's Day, about the week before, these are all lit up green, so you can imagine this whole statue is really lit up, and it's absolutely magnificent. It can be seen for miles and miles and miles. And Martina mentioned as well, he's facing Downpatrick, and he's also facing his mission fields, because if you think about it, he came in from this direction from the sea, and this is the area that he's facing. This is practically the whole of the north and the south, the whole of Ireland, and particularly the north, where he spent most of his time. These are the mission fields that Patrick is about to encounter. We mentioned these bronze slabs that are in the statue itself, the base of it. There's 4 of them, so we did one of them there, which is to do with the Latin concerning Leo, Pope Leo. And this one here is obviously what we've talked about when Patrick first arrived. It's all written in Irish. That was the language at the time. And you can see Patrick there. He's got the cross, and he's just arrived a few miles from here, just down there, the River Slaney. He's got his cohort there of monks and priests.
And a wolfhound.
And a wolfhound. Well, that's him on the right. That's Deku, as you can see on the left. That's the story, and roughly in Irish it says there that Patrick, encounters Deku. St. Patrick, you can see the name Deku there, D-I-C-H-U. So that's him and his cohort, and you can see on the left-hand side, if you look closely, you can see the barn behind him.
Yes.
And that is the very barn. We've been to the latest version of it there, just where Patrick had the first church. And you can see on the right-hand side behind Patrick, you can see the boat that he came up on, which is in the River Slaney. You can see that top right-hand corner, which tells the story. We're jumping a wee bit, but this is the middle one here, shows Patrick's death. Okay. And this is a scene that we've seen in the stained glass window down in St. Patrick's Church. And you can see our friend St. Tassic. You can see him there, just over Patrick. And he's got the Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, and he's given him the last rites. And that's Patrick there, and that's obviously the people praying and obviously preparing for Patrick's death. But as we know, his death brought him eternal life. Just to say one thing, is that one thing I always was impressed with Patrick himself, like all the great saints, I mean, they're human just like us. And he knew, he had to die as well. I mean, that journey had to come for him as well, which I find is always very comforting for each one of us, that Christ himself took that journey and his disciples take it with him into new life.
Martina?
Well, I was going to say that Patrick had a dream, that he is a man of visions, and so he had a dream that he was to return to Downpatrick. He didn't really want to come back here to die, but he was to die here and be buried here. And so that's why he's not buried in Armagh. His grave is not too far from here, and we'll go there shortly.
There's also another wee bronze plaque here. They are quite substantial.
The size of a small kitchen table, I'd say.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look, you can see St. Patrick, he lights the fire. The fire we refer to as the Paschal fire. You remember that in the church when Patrick went and lit the fire on Slane Hill across from Tara, where Larry the King. We mentioned that.
We did.
We did.
I was very facetious in saying it was a rocket ship, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. Well, there you go, right in front of you. That's actually the fire itself, a depiction of it. And you can see Patrick there lighting the fire with his priests and his monks. And that was the very first Easter fire on the first Easter vigil that he was here. That's a great depiction of that. So the statue as well.
Which one's Patrick again?
Patrick is on the left.
Well, the one with the crown.
Well, it's like a mitre.
Bishop's hat.
It's obviously quite modern. That's roughly the way that the mitres would have been back in the day whenever that was being built. But, it depicts him as the bishop, and you can see he's wearing the robes of the bishop as well. It would have been something much simpler back in the time of Patrick, but he was a debishop, so he would have had something to denote that. But that's the Paschal fire, lit on the first Easter vigil that he was here. And that represents, the coming of Christianity to Ireland. So really what this whole statue, you can see the base is about, it's really alluding to the story of Patrick bringing Christianity to Ireland. The viewer, as they look around, would be able to, enjoy that story, and also to see, the statue as well, for me, as well as it's a beautiful statue, it also shows you the power of the Holy Spirit in the man of Patrick, the apostle. And the fact that this has been the biggest statue of Patrick in Ireland and the world, the fact it's still the position, is kind of underlines that great magnificent story for all of us to enjoy.
Just changing the subject slightly before we run down the hill. We were talking to some people in the church, and they both, husband and wife, said, we know who you two are. So I'm going to ask this question to you, Martina, first of all, and then yourself as a barrister, Elaine, afterwards. Looking back, any fond thoughts of being a BBC NI political commentator, especially as we're transitioning now into the Windsor Agreement? And wouldn't it have been great if you were there? What do you think, Martina?
Oh, I have no regrets about not being there. I spent a good part of my life, and it was a blessed time, waiting for politicians to make up their minds and talking about the peace process until I realized that peace is a person, peace is Christ. And one of the reasons I think we have all these problems is that it's not rooted in Christ, it's rooted in political interests. And people need to look beyond the past, yes, own it and have healing, but they also need to look beyond their own interests. And, every peacemaker will tell you that, Nelson Mandela included, that you have to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and see things from their perspective. And hopefully this time there will be a resolution, because what's the alternative? It's just chronic arguments. So no, although the Lord in his wisdom has brought Elaine into my life as a good friend and a barrister who I would say is what I used to call Sinn Féin, institutionalized negotiators. So there's a lot of negotiations still in my life.
What did you call her?
I used to, an institutionalized negotiator. Even when she's won, she's still negotiating. I'm like, I agree with you. So I'm
never sure.
I'm never away from the negotiations, really. But no, I'm very, very happy at the turn of events in my life. It's a big surprise. You gotta kind of go with the flow. It's certainly taken a turn that I never anticipated. And I'm here in Elaine and I got these green sweatshirts made by a lovely company in Belfast who make a lot of kind of Christian outerwear. And this one it's green sweatshirts in Kelly green and says St. Patrick's Way Pilgrim Guide. So, but the reason I tell that story is that for years I avoided wearing green because when I was a child, my mother, being immigrants to Canada, dressed me from head to toe in green, including a green bow and green socks, and sent me off to school. So I fell out with St. Patrick for a while.
It had to be me. I would have put you up in blue because that's the colour of Ireland. Just saying.
Exactly. But yeah, so I've got to know St. Patrick in a kind of new, profound way. And he always points to Christ because all saints point to Christ. And so he's an amazing person for our time, an amazing kind of role model, especially for young people who have no faith. Because Patrick, the Lord can do anything. And he takes this young person with no faith and makes him the apostle of faith in Ireland. It's incredible.
And you, Elaine, I've got to say, by the way, that you mentioned the sweatshirts that you're wearing at the moment. You've missed a trick here because I would have bought a couple. You should have St. Patrick's Way on the front and on the back, St. Patrick's Way on tour, and name all the churches and places you go. Because, I would have bought one as a memento. So looking back on your past life as a barrister then, any thoughts on what you've learned from that and what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I think Martina mentioned about negotiation and compromise. I mean, I remember when we were religious sisters, one of our spiritual directors told us when you live in community or any sort of, encounter with a human being, you tend to have negotiation. What was the other word I used?
Conflict.
Conflict. Negotiation and compromise. It never leaves you. It never leaves you. And anyone out there listening knows. And that's something I used to do.
Compromise?
That's something I used to do a lot of when I was at the bar. My life was about negotiation and compromise, and it was always about trying to bring about the best outcome. And I had a great lady who shared a room with me. She's a KC herself, Monia, and you to get in. So she won't mind me, I hope using her name, but she used to say to me, Elaine, there was no blood on the floor. As long as there's no blood on the floor during negotiations, and as long as you're able to come away without that, I was always happy. So in relation to being a barrister and doing what I'm doing now, well, I guess I've been described by some people as a good communicator, educator, and an encourager. I suppose I've always had those gifts, and I had them as a barrister. They're more perhaps pronounced now. I've grown more in my spiritual journey, and where I am now, really, I would not have sought to be a St. Patrick's Way guide, but it was given to me as a gift, and I've grown into it, and I grow into it every day. And what it's about for me, it's about showing people this beautiful countryside, the beauty of this area, and the amazing story, as we said before, of a young 16-year-old boy who was humanly trafficked, which happens now on a much greater scale, perhaps, along with thousands of other people from his homeland, and brought to this country for 6 years, where he tended sheep. And out of that human tragedy, brokenness and darkness, out of that came actually, a revolution for the country that I live in, for Western civilization. And this all dates back to the yes of a young man called Patrick, to the gift of the Holy Spirit, to the gift of Christ. And this is what we have the opportunity to tell people. And the wonderful thing about it is that it's not sort of just for some people or, one sect of people. It's a story for everybody. There's so many elements of Patrick's story, this beautiful countryside and the walking and the community, the community of people, of sharing, listening to someone's story quietly, privately, listening to each other, having a bit of crack. And, it's a universal story, and it's for everybody. The fact that we've discovered this beautiful part of County Down, as you're discovering now yourself with your wife Alison, I mean, it gets better and better. And the fact that, one thing I would say is the fact that it's having such great success shows me that it has to be a good thing.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a seamless transition in some ways because pilgrim guides are storytellers, and so I've spent my life telling stories. and pointing to the truth as best I could.
Yeah, thank you for throwing the truth in, yeah.
Yeah, people are kind of cynical about journalists, but people make mistakes, but never would I want to deliberately mislead anyone. But I suppose there's a famous theologian called von Balthasar, and he talks about beauty, goodness, and truth. And sometimes we call this the way of beauty, because beauty does lead you to goodness, and goodness leads you to truth. And so we're all on a pilgrim. We're all on a pilgrim way, and this is an opportunity within your life to stop and think and look around and just enjoy the beauty and go home refreshed and hopefully a little bit lighter. We're heading for the grave shortly. Elaine's laughing.
I'm laughing because you mentioned a wee bit lighter. Whenever Martin was walking up the hill, I was thinking, gosh, the pounds are flying off him. So yeah, it does. You're a wee bit lighter in every way.
I'd be looking for those pound notes on the way down. But yeah, it's so we're on our way to the grave, and that's usually where there's 7 sites that we bring people, but the grave is the last site, and we have a little passport, and everybody gets each site. They get a little stamp like the Camino de Santiago, and I tell people at the start of the pilgrimage, we usually say some words. We pray the words of St. Patrick himself. Usually a pilgrim volunteers to recite these words. We use words like, stability of earth, firmness of rock. These are elements that the people understood, and the splendor of fire. But I tell people, when you get to the grave, I want you to lay your burden, whatever you've been carrying in your journey through life up to now, leave it with Patrick to be presented to the Most High God, and go home more refreshed and a little bit lighter.
And tell the story of the man.
Oh yeah, we did have a couple, and the man said to me, I keep trying to leave my burden at the grave, but my wife keeps following me out.
Yeah. Do you know what? Sorry, I mustn't laugh. No. How? No. How could I? Talking of which, we left her in the car.
The wife laughed as well.
Yeah, she would do. Well, we better go see her, because for those who want to come on the Pilgrim's Way, we'll give you more details again on how to find Elaine and Martina on the websites, and of course through the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, etc. But it's not for the faint-hearted. It's well worth a walk up. I mean, the view is just stupendous. There's no two ways about it. But bring on that cable car, because I wouldn't be able to push my wife up in a wheelchair on this.
Yes, I'd be for a cable car on a hot summer's day, no problem.
Well, listen, the fresh air is terrific. So
stunning.
Everything you need is here.
It's stunning.
So come and be amazed.
Right, so we've come down from the cable car that was put in specially for us. And you brought us to Struell Wells. Is that how you say it, Martina?
It's Struell Wells. It means it's in Irish for stream. And this is, I believe, the oldest pilgrimage site on the island. And for centuries, pilgrims have come here, made their way here for the eve of St. John the Baptist. And they came here to atone. And on this site, to my left, you can hear the birds singing. To my left is St. Patrick's Well, and I was speaking earlier about documentary evidence, a song from, I think, the 8th century of him singing psalms in this well all night to Christianize it. Because as you see, this is quite an amazing site, and it's walled. It's almost like a very long narrow field. There's another well in the middle, stone well, a covered well. That's the eye well. Patrick's Well is the mother well. And in the distance, you'll see a stone house, and there's another one behind it, and they were bath houses.
We're talking about what? I'm just trying to think about from playing golf. It's about 60 yards in length and about 40, 50 yards in width, going down into a narrower point at the end. But we're in like a little valley, really, aren't we? With almost like a quarry effect on the far left-hand side.
Local told me that's known as the Orange Shield. I don't know why. It might be because of the gorse that kind of is now growing on it. This was very popular in medieval times, post-Reformation. There was an indulgence from the Vatican if you made a pilgrimage here. But it's like all things that set out to be good and proper, they fall into kind of pagan practices. So people started to have a whiskey tent here, and there's all kinds of superstition and shenanigans going on. And Lady Southwell was one of the landed gentry, and there's a lot of kind of people looking down and saying this is not very Christian. And eventually the church withdrew the indulgence for the pilgrimage. But it is an authentic pilgrim site. It is authentically patrician. It's pre-Christian. Speculation that perhaps that was here, that the rituals, because there's a little stream just runs under the ruin of that church over there, which Elaine will tell you about. And pre-Christian times it was probably used for rituals because, the Celts, they worshipped water, was among the elements. And I talked to a local man who said that, this was known for a place of healing miracles. And he remembers somebody leaving their crutches up against that wall over there in the 1950s. So it is a holy site. It's in the hands of the state, but the local parish priest would say Mass here at Easter, on Easter morning, at dawn.
Basically, as Martina has said, when Patrick arrived, I mean, the water here, the stream, and they worshipped the elements, but also the chieftains used it for their pagan practices, and he knew that. He had been on Slemish, lived in the north for 6 years, so he knew their practices. So when he came here, as Martina said, Patrick's endeavour was to baptise and Christianise the water so that these things would not happen again. And I've no doubt maybe this was a place as well, given the water, that Patrick may have baptised also some of the new converts. So Martina's given you the main history of the whole area, but back in the day, whenever people came here in pilgrimage, there would have been hundreds and hundreds of people coming here. They would have come from the likes of Galway, Scotland as well, and they would have come all over Ireland, and a lot of them would have been in bare feet. There was no travel around or anything, and a lot of people when they came here, genuinely, it was a place of healing for them and the holy waters, because they were baptised by and blessed by a saint. In the days before things went askew. And beyond the bathhouse furthest there, which is the men and the women's bathhouse, very much at the bottom, maybe 100 yards down, you see another sort of ruin beyond that in a field. We're told beyond there, over there somewhere, that also those who didn't make it, would have been buried. Some people came here, obviously, and just weren't sick well enough, to head back. For those, obviously, who the Lord was calling to him, they were buried over there. Just to say where we are, Martina's pointed out to you, that used to be a church. Behind us on the left-hand side, just maybe 50 yards away, you'll see the ruin of a church. Now, there had been a church there because tax records around the 13th century refer to there being a church. And the church, actually, the altar went over the stream. Now, They were rebuilding the church. This was a new church that they were rebuilding, but this kind of hit around the Reformation time, and the landlords were not happy that this was being built. The local men, prominent men, so the building stopped on the church. So that's the ruin of it there. But it's a pretty good solid wall and everything. So Martina referred to the original spots. Obviously none of this infrastructure would have been here, but that marks the spot where Patrick would have been, as well as,
It's about the size of a modern day bathroom in a typical house.
Yeah, that area there would have been where he would have baptised, the water blessed it. Now underneath, there's a stream there just where the wall is, and there's obviously a water table underneath here. And it runs along here. That eye well is actually a natural spring. It's not, connected to the stream, so it bubbles up in any event. And people would go there for like eye cures and things like that there. Beyond that, you'll see the bathhouse. On the right-hand side is the men's, and the women's is on the left. It's obviously partitioned by a wall.
And how old is that?
That's about 1600 odds.
Wow, I mean,
the bathhouse itself, it's been there for some time, but the bathhouse itself is about 1600 odds. So really, the water goes underneath in the water table, and they build little culverts, which means that the water just flows through. Whether obviously if it's high, the water's very high, but if it's not, you still get a steady stream of water coming from underneath. The water board, the water table. Yeah. On the right-hand side would have been the men's, and on the left-hand side the women's, because this would have been like a bathing site, like Lourdes, or that like you've got baths in England, the holy the waters. Now obviously the Romans used it a lot, and that was kind of it was healing waters, healing properties. And
stupid question, how do we know that the men were on the right and the ladies went on the left?
We know that. Go ahead, Martina.
We know that because traditionally the one on the left was the only bathing house. And it was where everyone bathed together. And the Lady Southwell, who was connected to the Cromwells, she thought it was inappropriate for the men and the women to be bathing together. So they built the men's bathhouse, and you can see it is unusual. It has a stone roof. It probably goes back, I think, 1700s. And 1600s, thank you, Elaine. But what happened was the rich men started to pay to use the snazzy one there on the right, which is the men's. So the poor men couldn't afford the bathhouse, so the poor men ended up bathing with the women, which they might have preferred anyway. And the rich men went into the one, as you can see, it's very well preserved, and Elaine would lead pilgrims in there in the summer. She has the key to the gate, and it's very deep bath in there. And if you go towards the ladies' bathhouse on the left, it doesn't have a roof anymore, but you can see the pipe where the water would have come through the barrel. It was known as the limb well, and that people would have washed their hands and their feet and their limbs. But Elaine was talking there about people coming here on pilgrimage seeking healing, but the NHS wasn't around 1,000 years ago. People didn't have emergency rooms to go to. They relied on a miraculous healing, and they had great faith in the healing powers of this holy site. So through, obviously it's rooted in Christ, but they came here, they prayed for healing, and that is known as the eye well in the middle. So it is said to have properties for healing eyes. I know one of our pilgrims leaned in the summer and he lost his Ray-Bans in there. I think Elaine and I went back to see if they were there, but they were clearly either taken or sucked back into the stream.
One of the aspect of it is it's very hard to make out, but if you look up there, you'll see on the right-hand side, just below the gorse, there's kind of like a stump of stone. Now, that's known as Patrick's chair. Now, the story is, tradition holds it that when Patrick was here as well, he was also aware that the chieftains also used the likes of, maybe a stone chair up there as part of their practices. And tradition holds that Patrick also went up and sat on the chair and obviously Christianized it, blessed it. Now, over the years, it has been kind of chipped away at, and it's been, parts of it have come off. And it's also been damaged. I think the last damage to the chair was maybe a couple of 100 years ago. So it really kind of is in ruins. But it is documented in the material that's here in Struell that is known as Patrick's chair.
And the priest would have heard confession. You're supposed to go up in a penitential way on your knees. I didn't know that, and I tried to climb up. So I was thrown onto my knees anyway. It was pretty painful, but people don't tend to go up there.
No, it's not encouraged. The briars are very big, and it's been kind of broken down. So, but it is documented there, and you can see something from here.
Yeah, and then Elaine talked about the field and the distance where people would have been buried, but there's also a house there. It's an old ruin, and I met a man here one day, and he said he lived in the house as a child. So he had very fond memories of the 50s and 60s. He said this would have been a very popular picnic area for families. I think he said there was an outdoor plumbing. So they would have used this as their drinking water. Now, I wouldn't recommend it today. I think I think they did some testing to see if it could be bottled, but it's been contaminated. So possibly by,
fertilizer. It says in a Bristolian accent. Why I go back into Bristolian accent?
Now, there's some graffiti here that goes back centuries up on the chair. Apparently, I think it's around 1800. There's graffiti, and also there's a little etching into the side of the well, which is about a 13th century cross, which had previously been, I think, in the church, on the church. So we can show you.
You can see these little windows come from, like chancel windows. They come from the original church that was here. I mentioned that was there before that one was built. So it was definitely around there, around the 1300s. And those, as you look straight ahead, Martin, like the little chancel windows, nice little kind of choice little windows that are just being built into the, into the wall there beside St. Patrick's Well.
Fantastic. Come around and look at the well.
Please.
So just go through this little gate.
What's so amazing here, of course, is that it hasn't been touristied, if that's the right word to use, because we are miles from the nowhere. You've already made mention of the birds in the trees chirping away, and here we have it. Yeah.
I think it's 13th century, and you can see it's a very simple. Someone has drawn like a line and a cross, and then in each end of the cross there's a little triangle. It's an ancient Christian cross, and you'd see that shape. I think you'd see it on Patrick's grave.
About the size of a paperback book, isn't it, really, with a cross? What does the triangle signify, do you think?
The Trinity, I think.
I think that's right.
Paddy was here as well.
Yeah, Paddy was there.
I don't think that's 13th century.
Oh, no. I wouldn't read the rest of that out.
I thought it said Pat.
I think that's new because
it is new. It hasn't been there before. Someone's just added their own little motif to it.
Bless.
As happens. So we're coming around now to St. Patrick's Well.
Wow.
Now you can look in. Now the water's not very high.
Yeah, I mean, imagine it's like a modern day jacuzzi in your hotel that you're going to.
It's actually, that water's been higher than it's been in a while. Normally what we find is that it's gone down a bit. Normally it's much higher. But as Martina said, that's the well that Patrick would have bathed in all night singing psalms and blessed it.
Wow.
It's a beautiful sight. Usually by the time people come here, if they are doing the long pilgrimage from Slieve Patrick to here, they've walked a lot of laneways, an ancient pilgrim route with views of Slieve Donard, but they're pretty wrecked, and they're usually, as I say to Elaine, sprawled out on the grass, gasping for refreshment. So I usually come out in the afternoon with ice cream and refreshments. There's no gift shop, We had one lady, Celine, who was an amazing woman, and she's one of our early pilgrims. She had done the Camino de Santiago, and she was skipping around the place. She wanted her tour immediately. She didn't want to rest, and she could have done, I think, the whole circuit again, maybe 3 times.
Yeah, she was energized by being here. Like, she just, Martina took that route. I normally take the afternoon route, which is the 14 miles. Martina takes the morning one, but she brought the pilgrims out, and there were pictures of Celine with her, her walking sticks. She did a video.
Wow.
She did a video, and she just, the energy flying out of her was incredible. But that just shows you the buzz that she got from coming on St. Patrick's Way.
That was my first time doing that route. I was filling in, and I wasn't 100% sure of. I had an idea, I had gone through the route, but I said, I think it's right. And like one exhausted pilgrim said, you better be right. Like, they're going to kill me, but it was right. But I called Elaine just to be double sure, because it's an amazing route, but it's quite muddy. We actually changed the route because it got very muddy in certain parts of the year. You can't do it.
It's a must for people to come here because it's so tranquil, so quiet and peaceful here. It's brilliant. And I'm so glad you brought us here. Where are we off to next?
Yeah, I think we'll go to Down Cathedral and then we'll finish at the grave, if that's okay, Martin.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, guys. Well, this is brilliant. We're now in Down Cathedral, and Martina and Elaine have brought us here. And with me is Finbar McIlmick, who's an archaeologist and also a tour guide here. Tell us more about this amazing cathedral, please.
Well, the cathedral is built here because of its association with the burial of St. Patrick. The interesting thing about Downpatrick is that although Patrick founded churches all over Ireland, he never actually founded a church at this point here. He was buried here, which was very unusual because most saints, virtually all saints, are buried in their main monastery. And when St. Patrick Christianised Ireland and built churches all over Ireland, he made Armagh the headquarters of the church, which it still is today for both the Catholic Church and for the Anglican Church. According to the earliest biographer of St. Patrick, it said that when Patrick felt that his mission was over and death was approaching, he set out for Armagh, intending to die there and be buried there. But an angel appeared to him in a dream and told him to go back to where he first came to Ireland. So he went back to Struell, which is a few miles out the road, and there he died. He also knew that there was going to be a row about his body after he died, which turned out to be the case. So what he said was, when I die, get 2 untrained oxen, tie them to a cart and shoe them off, and wherever they stop, bury me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they didn't go to Armagh, which is quite a distance from here, but came a few miles up the road and stopped on this hill here. At that time, this hill was a secular settlement and the headquarters of a local kingdom.
The name of the kingdom was?
It was the Downpatrick, or the Ully. The name Ully Ulster gets its name from.
Ah, right, got you.
The capital of the Ully. And he was buried here, and then it was changed from a secular site into a monastic site and has remained an ecclesiastical site until the present day. Okay?
Fantastic.
There was a series of churches built here during the early medieval period, but nothing of them survives. Most of them were wood, and even if they were stone, they would have been incorporated, the stone would have been incorporated into later buildings. With the coming of the Normans, new continental orders were brought over, like the Benedictines and the Cistercians, and this became a Benedictine site. And you're standing inside the shell of a medieval Benedictine monastery. You can see the carvings on top of pillars there, the faces over there, do you see them?
Yes.
And on this one here you can see vine leaves and grape, representing the communion, which would have taken place at the eastern end of the church. This remained as a Benedictine abbey until the Reformation, and as in the case of all abbeys across Britain and Ireland, they were dissolved under King Henry VIII. And this was left as a ruin for the next few hundred years, and it survived as a roofless ruin up until 1790, when the Anglican authorities, the land, of course, fell into the new Reformed Church with the Reformation, when the Anglican authorities decided that they would put the roof back on and change it into the cathedral that you're in now. So you're inside a medieval monastery with a Georgian cathedral superimposed into it.
Oh, superb. You said you're an archaeologist. What's the oldest piece here that we could go, oh, right, this almost dates back to Patrick himself?
Well, there's very little from the period of Patrick, but for the centuries afterwards, there are pieces of cross in the vestibule when you came in. They were originally on top of St. Patrick's traditional grave, and it was replaced by that big monolith that you see there over 100 years ago. So those are from the early medieval period. And the baptismal font, which you see up here, was originally the base of a high cross. At some stage it was removed and the opening made bigger, and it was turned into a horse trough. And it was actually sitting outside a hotel in Downpatrick for a few hundred years until somebody in the 1930s, I think, spotted that it was a piece of ecclesiastical sculpture. So then it was brought up here and is now the baptismal font. So it's in its third use. High cross base, horse trough, baptismal font. So that's very early as well, yeah.
Brilliant. Which part of this church gives you the greatest amount of pleasure?
I think it's a rather beautiful church because, unlike most cathedrals, it's not a parish church. So when this was a ruin, they built a parish church down the street, which is still there. So when they built it, they didn't really have a congregation, so they only fitted out 2/3 of the cathedral in pews. And it gave you this wonderful narthex, almost by mistake. So you can see the front and the back of the magnificent Georgian organ up here. Yes. Every other organ I know of is up against the wall, and you can only see the front of it. So I think that's a special feature. Yes. Also, these old, beautiful family box pews, they were taken out of churches in Victorian times in most places, so they have very rarely survived. So I think they give the place character, you know. Yeah.
You mentioned the boxes as well, because we hear of up until like maybe 1800s or something like that, all families had their own private boxes.
All had their own but it was found to be very divisive because it was only rich families had their own boxes. So those who weren't rich had to stand at the back or around the place. And in Victorian times, the Anglican Church decided this was very divisive, and these were taken out. And the ordinary pews that are not as divisive, that you can't see who the rich and the poor are when you walk into a church, were placed instead. But here they survived. I'm not sure why they survived. Maybe they just didn't have the money to take them out and put in new ones, but it's very fortuitous. You also have the bishop's seat, which is...
I was going to ask about that. Tell us more.
Yeah, you can see his mitre on top. Yeah. And also when the courts used to only sit a few times a year, and when the judges were attending court, they also attended the Anglican Church, and of course they wanted their own seats to show that they were a little bit better than everybody else. So there's the two judges' seats from the Crown Court and from the Petty Sessions there as well.
Sitting opposite the bishop's seat.
And these are the coats of arms of the families who donated money to the restoration of the cathedral. The nice thing about the cathedral as well is that it's virtually totally symmetrical. Most churches have vestries stuck onto them or confession box outshots onto them, but this church is beautifully symmetrical, you know.
It is. On all our previous churches have been into today, a lot has been made mention quite rightly of the stained glass windows. So are there any particular stained glass windows here we should discuss?
There's a stained glass window erected in I think in the 1930s that commemorates St. Patrick, and on the left they show him as a slave when he was brought over and looking after sheep. Then, of course, the story that he escaped, took up holy orders, became a bishop, and returned then to Christianised Ireland. So the right-hand side of the stained windows shows him back with his monks.
And also, because we had to climb up to see St. Patrick's statue, I now know that the crook was facing inwards. No, wasn't? Is that right? It was facing inwards. Whereas here it's facing to the side. And when he was a young man, in one of the stained glass windows, he's holding the crook in his left hand, but as an old man here, he's holding the crook on the right hand. Any reason for that, apart from maybe the artist?
I've stared at this for years and years, but I've never noticed that. So thank you for pointing it out. Thank you for pointing it out to me. Although so many people pointed out to me that sheep has a very long neck at the bottom.
And it's a llama.
It's a llama, yeah. I don't know what a llama is, because I know of no early evidence for St. Patrick being associated with llamas.
Finbar, this has been a sheer delight. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your time with us. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, guys, we've got to go and see outside, but anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would say that one of my favourite features of the cathedral is if you go with me up to the ambo. This is where the Word of God is read, and you go to the other side. Okay? Uh-huh. Now, if you see, it's a very simple altar, but above the altar, you have a hollow cross. So you have the cross, and the figure inside is a hollow Christ. So it's like you see now behind that cross with the cutout Christ inside it, it's hollow. You see all these beautiful stained glass of the apostles. Yes. But if you stand at a certain point, just at this tile, and you look through the cross, what you see in the middle of the cross is the risen Christ.
Yeah.
So that's why it's hollow. It's quite beautiful.
Oh, really? So there's always a reason in art that I hardly know anything about, to tell you the truth. Well, listen, thank you so much. We've got to go and see now one final thing. The grave. Wow, that was brilliant. Thank you for organising for me to listen to the wise words of Finbar. He was absolutely fantastic. And so we're rapidly concluding what will now be a two-parter for St Patrick's Day. You've brought us about 30, 40 yards outside the church here, Cathedral Church actually, in Downpatrick, the highest point of the land. What exactly are we looking at, please, Elaine?
Okay, so we are actually at St Patrick's grave, and you can see a very large stone that's covering the grave, and you can just about make out on the grave itself. It does need probably a little bit brushed up. You can see Patrick's name, and you can see obviously it probably needs a bit brushed up there, but you can see the Celtic cross.
There's a triangle at the bottom again. Kind
of maybe just depicting the Celtic cross of its time, and you can see, the size of it's massive. It took about 12 men to quarry this. Wow. And in 1900 this was done, because what was happening is, you can see all around here, there's stone all around. The story goes is that so many people were coming and taking soil, from the grave, that when people were going to America, a lot of the suitcases were filled with soil. So they were concerned about that, rightly so. It was so popular. So they obviously emblazoned it around here with stone and put this big stone on top of it. And it took about 24 guys to be able to get this with the horses and put it on top. But the background story is, we're right beside the Down Cathedral. Mm-hmm. It's just across from us here. Absolutely beautiful aspect. And as Martina's pointed out before, you're looking on to Slieve Patrick. So you're really almost at the high point of Downpatrick itself. There is another high point beyond this called the Mound of Down, because as Martina mentioned before, this had been a seaside town. And before the barrages were built, there were 3 of them, the last one being 1956 out by the Coyle. This area here would have regularly flooded, but there were 2 hills that more or less would have been almost untouched. This would have been it, Down Hill here, and also the Mound of Down. So then you've heard from Finbar, whenever St Patrick died, he was told by his angel that he was to be put on the back of a cart, and 2 steer were to pull him up, and wherever they stopped. Tradition has it that they stopped here on the Hill of Down. Now, he was buried here somewhere on the Hill of Down, and then John de Courcy in 1100 odds, he was a great sponsor of Patrick, but also for political reasons too. And what he did was, he got the papal legate at that time, who was Vivian. He got him over from Rome, and he took the remains of Patrick and also Bridget and Columkill and had them reinterred in one site here, so that this would be a place where people would come. And, as well as paying homage to Patrick, also would come to Downpatrick, of which de Courcy, was obviously a prince and an earl over as well. So this site has been famous for years, and this is probably the best evidence of St Patrick's resting place. And now what we have here as well, we bring the pilgrims here, and we also have each of them get a little passport. And
in blue?
In blue. We also have one in green. Green or blue, because most of them also conclude with St Patrick's grave, which we have as well on that too. Wow. So what I'm going to do for you now is, you're going to hear this sound. We have, Martina and I will both have our stamps. Just like, the Camino passport, we have a passport here for St Patrick's Way. And what we do is, we have a little stamp here, which is authentic. You can see St Patrick's Way plus the mitre on top of the crozier. And what we do is, we stamp that to sort of just to as a memory to the people, like, you finished St Patrick's Way. So if you want to now, I'll stamp this and give this passport to yourself, and as well to your lovely wife Alison, so you can take that away with you. If you'd like me to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
What we'll do now, I have it right on St Patrick's grave, and I'll just give it the stamp. And that proves, I'll give another one up here as well, and that proves that you have been on St Patrick's Way. Wow.
And also you've been to Saul, so you should probably have that stamped.
Fantastic pictures here, which obviously, I'm hoping everybody wants to come to this now. Just being cynical, not that I would ever be cynical, but if I was cynical on behalf of those that are listening that are, how authentic do you think it is that St Patrick is actually underneath here?
It is by tradition that he's buried here. There's no evidence he's buried anywhere else. He died here, and people passed on the oral tradition that he was buried here. There's 3 saints buried in this grave. I
was going to mention that.
Yeah, there's an ancient rhyme that the children sing in Down. three saints in
One grave.
do Phil, Patrick,
Patrick,
Bridget, and
and
Colin
Kill.
Kill. Well, normally we know this, but we haven't looked at it in a while.
It makes it more interesting.
So the three saints are
There's a
here.
few laughs at the back there.
So,
The cheap seats.
I wouldn't say that all his body is here, because in those days the relics were taken. There is tradition that his jawbone is in Derryahy.
Where's that?
It's not far from Belfast, and it's a relic, and they have examined his jawbone and said if Fitzpatrick's be about 6 feet tall. The Irish like to bury their saints outside. Now, the original burial was said to be inside where the cathedral is, but of course he wanted these bones found, and Malachy, who was in charge here, he was under great pressure to find them, and he was praying very late at night, very worried, and this beam of moonbeam said to have come down, and on that spot he started digging, and he found 3 boxes. Now, Bridget said to have come here because the Vikings were raiding, and so to protect her bones in Kildare, where she was originally buried, they were brought here. Colin Kill was said to have said that his soul would be in Derry, but his body would lie with Patrick's, and that this story is kind of more fantastical in that the Vikings raided Iona, where he was, found a fancy box, took it thinking it was treasure, found it was nothing but bones, and discarded it here, on a beach. It washed up. But, as you said earlier about the traditions about
Richard III.
the third being buried beneath this car park, in this particular spot, I'm not going to die in a ditch, but I think, I'm quite certain that Patrick is buried here.
And for those that are saying Colin Kill, that name rings a bell. We're talking about, in modern day English, St Columba.
Yeah, that's right. And, he was born in the 6th century, and again a disciple of Patrick, and Patrick and Columba and Bridget are the 3 primary saints that we have here in Ireland, and no better place for them than to be buried together in one grave.
Literally just 10 yards away there's a grave, a big gravestone with the name McCartan, and you mentioned McCartan earlier on. I'm just trying to remember who McCartan was.
McCartan was Patrick's strongman. He was said to have been paid by Patrick's family to protect him. But Patrick, like a lot of people Patrick encountered, McCartan was converted and became Christian and a saint. And I believe he's one of, 9 or 12 people that Patrick put in charge of defending the faith on the island, along with St. Donald.
There's a cathedral called St. McCartan's Cathedral in Clogher, which is named after St. McCartan, and it's also where he had his ecclesiastical place, because Patrick told him to choose a place that wasn't too close to Armagh but not too far away for communication, and that's where he chose, and that's where his cathedral is.
Well, guys, I can't thank you enough. It's been absolutely an amazing day. And before we go off for fish and chips, I think it's only fair to say that those that listen all around the world, hopefully, and going, yeah, I'd like to come over here. How can they get hold of you, and where can they find more information, please?
Well, you can find us through St Patrick's Centre, www.stpatrickcentre, all one word, with the saint, the full spelling.com, and if you get on there you can find all the experiences. And also there's a telephone number, Martina. It's
028 44 61 9000. And
we also have a Facebook page, St Patrick's Centre Facebook page.
And we have some amazing guides. One of them is Dwayne Fitzsimmons, who is a direct descendant of one of the Anglo-Normans that came here to conquer this land, and he does an amazing walk called Patrick and the Pagan Hills. He's like a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah, you can also access him through St Patrick's Centre as well.
Brilliant. And don't forget, if you mention off-grid Christianity when you book up, you'll get an extra chip.
That's it.
An extra couple of chips.
Thanks very much to you and Alison. You've been very patient and listening to us and hearing the story, and so thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thanks for the privilege of being able to talk with you, Martin.
Wow,
God bless you.
You've been very gracious. Thank you so much, guys.
Good luck with the editing.
You normally finish, well, you finished off last time, Martina, so you can say cheerio, Elaine.
To all those on Martin's podcast, thanks for listening. You deserve a medal for that, and God bless. Cheerio.
God bless.
Just when we thought we had the last word, Zoe, we've never met before, she was listening intently, and so we decided to give her the passport. So what happens next then, Elaine?
What happens is, whenever we finish, we always have one of our pilgrims say St Patrick's Breastplate at the end. And just as we came here, Zoe was there, and I think she's a pilgrim, and she came up here to the grave. So I think, as an authentic pilgrim, Zoe should have the last word from St Patrick's Breastplate.
I arise today through the strength of heaven, light of the sun, splendour of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of the wind, depth of the sea, stability of the earth, firmness of the rock. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to protect me, God's hosts to save me, afar and near. Alone or in multitude, Christ shield me today against wounding. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me. Amen.